Hello everyone and welcome to the video. So today we're going to be going into the first video, going into the urinary system and identifying the structures of the urinary system and their function. So here, the urinary system, we're talking about the kidneys, the bladder, and so forth. And the kidneys, the purpose of the urinary system is mainly to form urine from blood. Now, so urine comes from your blood. How does that work? So the blood comes into the kidneys, goes through this complex filtration process, and it decides your body does not need ends up heading to your bladder and becomes urine. So, like I said in this video, we're going to identify the urinary system structures and go over their functions and the overall functions of the urinary system itself. So first, we're going to be looking at the gross anatomy of the urinary system. Now, we're going to look inside the kidneys themselves next video, where we're going to look at the loop of Henle and things like that, how filtration actually happens then in the kidney. Right now, we're just generalizing and just looking at just the gross anatomy outside the kidney. So here we have, two kidneys left and the right. The right kidney here is slightly lower than the left kidney because your liver is located right there. Also, whenever talking about the urinary system, you might see the word renal. We'll see renal artery and so forth. Whenever you see renal, it's referring to the kidney. Or, oh, not M, neph. So nephrology, nephron loop, and things like that. Whenever you see that term in a word, it's also referring to filtration in the kidney. So renal, nephron, nephrology, and so forth is this study and looking at the kidneys themselves. So here, first main organ of the urinary system, of course, are the two kidneys. You would also have the renal artery splitting off and coming into each of these, and then you would have a renal vein leaving after the filtration exits as well, coming back up the inferior vena cava and then back up to the heart. But so here you have the whole filtration occurring when this blood comes in and then re-exits. So this all gets through here, filters, comes out, and boom. So whatever doesn't come back into the blood exits a tube called the ureter. It then travels down each side. So the ureter is just a smooth muscular tube, and then enters then at the base of the bladder. The bladder is just a storage area. So this is showing a male reproductive system down here. So males have a prostate, females do not. So after storage in the bladder, and then individual decides to go to the bathroom, urination is known as micturition. The urine then exits the urethra. So make sure you don't confuse urethra and ureter. They are different tubes where urine passes through. All right, so that's just a general overview of the urinary system, but we're going to look at some of these organs in a little bit more detail now. First here, showing that kidney, this is from the posterior side or from the back. So you can see the ribs right here. So here's the two floating ribs, the 11th and 12th. You can see how the right kidney is slightly lower than the left kidney on the back. So the kidneys are retroperitoneal, which means they're just outside the peritoneal cavity on the posterior aspect in the abdominal region. And then here the ureters then come out and then would come down and into the bladder. So the structure of the ureters themselves, I mentioned how they are a muscular tube. So in the middle, of course, there is a lumen, that's the central area. There is an epithelial tissue in there that surrounds the inside. Now the ureter epithelial tissue is known as transitional epithelial tissue because it can transition as volume moves through it and it pushes out. It can transition from a cuboidal or columnar into a cuboidal or squamous, like as it pushes out and the pressure pushes out as fluid moves through it. And then there's the smooth muscle layer here as well. So there's circular and longitudinal smooth muscle in the muscle layer that allows assistance in the movement of urine down through the tube. And then, of course, there's a connective tissue layer on the outside called the adventitia. So this is just the structure of the ureters, and the key function of the ureters is transport. Whereas the key function of the kidneys up here goes through filtration. Filtration is where it pushes blood out into the kidneys, and then you reabsorb. Reabsorption in terms of the kidneys is what comes back into your blood, and secretion is what ends up as waste. So those are all the main functions of the kidneys themselves. In terms of urine production, they do a lot of other functions that we'll talk about later too. All right, so now the ureters drain down into the bladder. So the bladder, its function is storage. So just storing that urine. And so the ureters come down in here and then actually drain down into the base. So then urine comes in and can fill up the bladder then. So you can get urine filling up in there. And as that urine stretches and pushes on the walls of the bladder, that sends a, signal via your nervous system to your brain that you sense bladder stretch and are then ready to go to the bathroom, which is known as micturition. Here it's talking about in the bladder has that transitional epithelial layer as well. There's also a smooth muscle found in the bladder. It's called your detrusor muscle right here. So detrusor, very strong muscle. And because of this transitional tissue in these detrusor muscles, and there's some foldings in here called the rugae as well, when the bladder stretches and is much larger when it's filled with urine, it still has the same contractile force as when it's not stretched. And it's because of these muscles and adaptations it has for that. So imagine skeletal muscle. When you stretch a skeletal muscle, you're actually weakest where it's most stretched. And when you get to this point, like in a biceps curl, you're stronger there because you have more overlapping muscle fibers. So your bladder is able to have its contractile force regardless of its stretch. And then there's two sphincters. So sphincters are muscles valves pretty much that can open and close, so relax and constrict to allow micturition or urination happen. There's an internal urethral sphincter and an external urethral sphincter. The internal one here is smooth muscle, which means it's involuntary. So babies and people with urinary incontinence have no control over their urination because it's only regulated via smooth muscle, which is smooth muscle is involuntary and automatic or autonomic. So once this stretches signal, it sends a reflex that then opens up that sphincter. However, when you learn how to hold it, per se, we then have the external urethral sphincter, which is skeletal muscle. So that gives you voluntary control over micturition. So now the bladder can stretch to a point to where you just have to go no matter what. It's got one hole to go out, and so it's going to go out because you don't want to risk rupturing the bladder, which is technically possible, but usually doesn't happen. And then the urine, once you start going to the bathroom, exits via the urethra all the way out. So male urethra is much longer than the female's urethra right here. So females are more prone to UTIs or urinary tract infections. So an infection can get up into the urinary tract here, get into the bladder, whereas males has a lot further for that bacteria or whatever to get up into the bladder to cause a UTI. Then even you can have that infection go all the way up through the ureters and get into the kidneys as well and cause an infection in kidneys. And that's where it can get very dangerous if there's a kidney infection. So that's urethra for excretion. So pretty much just another tube for a passageway of the fluids. Now, down here, finally, the functions of the urinary system. So here, functions, of course, it is filtering blood. So filtration of blood comes in and you're getting the waste. And so here, excretion of waste, then urea, uric acid, creatinine. All of these are metabolic waste produced by your body, the breakdown of proteins and things like that. You have to get them out. You don't want them to build up in your blood. So you get them out, and that's why urine has that ammonia-like smell to it. And then regulation of blood volume. Now, when you increase the volume of something, you increase the pressure. Think about a contained structure like your blood vessels. You increase more fluid in there, you increase blood pressure and the amount of pressure pushing out. So here, blood pressure regulation is a big regulatory response of the kidneys. Also, maintaining electrolyte balance. So this is another big one. So your electrolytes like sodium, potassium, calcium, or phosphate ions, all these are important electrolytes in your body, and they need to be in a very, very fine-tuned amount to keep things like your heartbeat, central nervous system, muscle contraction, all that working properly. You need to keep that well balanced. Also, pH. So kidneys regulate hydrogen ion concentrations in the blood as well, and they help keep your blood pH constant, even though there is that blood buffering system with bicarbonate ions and carbonic acid. And then also, your kidneys also produce some hormones, which we talked about in the endocrine system chapter. So ones like EPO, erythropoietin, which causes red blood cell production, so production of more red blood cells. Renin is one that does the renin angiotensin aldosterone pathway. Aldosterone is a hormone that then, remember, targets the kidney and increases sodium reabsorption. When you increase sodium reabsorption back into your blood, water will follow. Water follows sodium. That's more volume, and that's where we get regulation of blood pressure. And then also calcitriol. Calcitriol is what vitamin D is. And vitamin D gets activated by the kidneys, and vitamin D is very important for your immune system and also very important for calcium homeostasis here. So if blood calcium levels get too low, not only do you release a hormone called parathyroid hormone. Not only does that hormone target the bones for releasing calcium, it also targets the kidney to activate vitamin D so you can absorb more calcium in your small intestine. It also causes more calcium, so parathyroid hormone also causes more calcium reabsorption in the kidney as well. So, long story short, you lose kidney function, you lose a lot of vital functions to life. So that's why renal failure is such a bad thing. And something to pay very, very close attention to. But this was just a little intro video to the urinary system here, going over the main anatomical features of it and their basic overview of their functions. Next video, we're going to be going into the kidney, looking at some more gross anatomy inside the kidney, but then going down into the microscopic anatomy and looking at the structures of a nephron loop or a loop of Henle, a glomerulus, and a little bit on how the filtration process works for how urine is formed from your blood. All right, that's all I have for this video. Hope you have a great rest of your day. And like always, please let me know if you have any questions, and bye-bye.